Alright, guys, we're going to finish up the America from the 1970s to the 1990s. Tomorrow, we're actually going to get into the 1990s. This is kind of the bridge episode before we get to modern era. So, let's dive in. We already talked about this a little bit in our class, but what I want you to remember is Forrest Gump. Remember, Jenny died of a disease that wasn't really clear. But what was a major leading or the new major health concern was AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And this was really emerging in the 1980s and led to a worldwide epidemic that we're still really going through. And what happened was it's a sexually transmitted disease that destroys someone's autoimmune system. It doesn't kill the person, but other diseases will because it affects your immune system. And Jenny and Forrest Gump actually had this. Now, what's important about this is we still don't have a cure for it, but there's a huge worldwide scramble now to get this cure. So this global disease is kind of bringing together um, global perspectives and trying to fight it. So it does have some positives, even though it's a terrible disease. Drug abuse. The Just Say No campaign got started during this time. Remember, we talked about this a little bit with Ronald Reagan's wife, Nancy Reagan. But during the 60s and 70s, as we saw in Forrest Gump, there was widespread drug addiction, widespread drug abuse. Now, what happened was people in the 80s and 90s, with the resurgence of conservatism, and as people got more mature from the 60s and 70s, they realized just how much damage these drugs did. And they began a campaign against those drugs, which now we know today is Just Say No. Education, we saw that education becomes a major factor. And there's a new report that comes out, A Nation at Risk, which really looked at it. Now, at the beginning of the semester, we really talked about Sputnik and how it pushed Americans forward academically. But nothing really was done between Sputnik and the 1980s. And what America found was that a lot of discrepancies developed between education. We weren't developing like we should, and there was a severe gap in basic skills. And teachers weren't paid a lot, and because of that, we didn't have highly qualified people in there teaching kids. So those two issues are still being worked on today, especially teacher pay. We need some more cash. Women's rights. And now, with the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment, which you can see down here on the map, it wasn't ratified by enough states. Now, a lot of them did. Texas was one of them, but a lot of other states didn't. We saw that women's rights was still a major issue. And the main push after the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment was a push for women into political office, showing that women can be CEOs, women can be presidents. Women are trying to fight, especially for both political and economic equality in the workforce. And that's why we see a major emphasis because Hillary Clinton was just nominated for the Democratic Party's nomination. There's a major emphasis trying to get her and to be elected as the first woman president. So energy on the American way of life. We see that energy is a really major discussion today. You always see in the news about renewable energy sources, wind turbines, preserving gas. Energy affects the way of life so much because we have all of our technology is based off it. All of our technologies either sorry about that, guys. Apologize. But energy is a major way of life, and basically what we use, everything we use today, is based off of energy. And if you look at our laptops, our phones, cars, we use tons of all these new energy resources, and it's a drain altogether. So we got to figure out how to change it. And this really shows the changing in America. We before the 1980s, most people really worked in the Rust Belt. And you see over here on my PowerPoint, the Rust Belt is basically all the northeastern states, the states that had a lot of factories, a lot of iron. They're called rust because it's cold. There's a lot of iron deposits. There's a lot of industrial outputs there. And what happened was people moved from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt. And that's where we are. The Sun Belt is basically the region of the United States. It considers stretched across the southern portion of the United States. Basically, think about where all the sun hits, that's where it is. And over the past decade, mainly air conditioning made it easier for people to deal with the summer heat in the region. That's why we see a large population moving to the south. And ever since the 1980s, we see tons of these new industrial factories, business centers move from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt. And that's kind of what we see here. There's some causes and some effects. The cause is there's jobs being lost in the Midwest, and the South becomes much more attractive because of our more hospitable climate. But there are some effects. There's a huge growing population in the West and the South, which increase the political representation in the West and the South. So more power goes to the West and the South because more people are there to get electoral votes, where we see a declining of power in the North and Midwest. So we also see globalization in media. Not only do we see music taking off, but again, movies are really pertinent to looking at globalization. And a lot of our culture is spread through movies. If you look at the top 10 movies ranked here, you see that our culture has spread around the world. All 10 of these top movies were made in America. And they, uh, they produced more overseas wealth than domestic wealth. And that shows just the influence we have. Our media spreads our culture because it's viewed in all these different nations. Because it's viewed in all these different nations, it's the main way that people see America. And lastly is country western music. Country western music really developed in the 1970s. And it was a blend of several different musics. It's gospel, jazz, blues, folk, and it's all basically old British folk music that's blended with cultural traditions, and especially in southern Appalachian valleys. But we see that country really becomes big. Not today's country. Taylor Swift, that's not country. This was actual country country. All right, guys. Well, that ends our show for today. We're gonna finish the 1990s going onward. See you tomorrow.